Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 474. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind, interested in learning about trauma, and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's Trauma Therapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. Several years ago when I was in graduate school and just starting seeing clients, I was doing a lot of commuting, like an hour and a half each way to my site. I was always thinking about my clients. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Why didn't I do that? Why I should have done that? And I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be awesome if I had a seasoned master trauma therapist sitting right there beside me in the passenger seat? Well, obviously that didn't happen. So I created the program, and it's Trauma Therapist 2.0. It's my online community specifically dedicated for new trauma workers. If that's you, if you're just starting out on this trauma-informed journey, you're passionate about this work, and you're looking to gain confidence, you're looking to share your journey, share your challenges, and share your wins, to get inspiration, also to help to inspire others, I want to invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Monica Bhagwan. Monica, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Guy.
You are welcome. So Monica is a practitioner and thought leader in applying an understanding of trauma and trauma-informed care to public health nutrition initiatives. She currently serves as an educator and program manager at Leah's Pantry, an innovative public health nutrition nonprofit in California. Leah's Pantry creates resources, conducts community programs, and provides training to other nutrition professionals. They're a leader in applying a trauma-informed lens to food and nutrition programs, an approach Monica initiated and co-leads. Monica, awesome. Like I said before we started, I'm really excited to talk about this. I haven't addressed this on the podcast, so looking forward to diving in here. Before we do, share with our listeners where you're from initially and where you are currently, and then let's dive in.
Okay, great. Well, I'm an East Coaster, and I've been living in the Bay Area for 15 years now.
Nice.
And my family background is I'm actually an immigrant from the English-speaking Caribbean, a country called Guyana, or some people might know it as British Guyana. So that's my cultural background.
Awesome. So, we are right now kind of in the midst of COVID experience. How are you doing?
I'm grateful that, my life is stable, my family is healthy, and I have some coping skills under my belt that are helping me to get through this.
Like what? Such as what?
Well, a lot of mindfulness practice, a pretty, robust physical exercise practice, and just using the skills and the practices that I've learned from understanding trauma and therapeutic practices that I've picked up from all the wonderful clinicians out there who share these things. So reaching out to friends really intentionally, and especially with phone calls, which is something we've lost in the last few years. So having just phone conversations really nice.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So let's start. How did you get into this field?
Well, yeah, my background is very multidisciplinary. I spent some years both in culinary work, doing cooking professionally, but also getting my graduate degree in food studies. So I had a strong interest in food as a cultural practice,
Hmm.
historical context, as well as sort of the social context. Um, oh, and with a real sensibility towards um, social justice and inequity and historical, um, you know, dynamics of around food. Um, and my work, I really got drawn more into doing using food in community service and doing community work, and I began working with nonprofits, doing nutrition workshops, cooking workshops, um, and also working in a lot of the social service settings, just cooking and working with community to build, use food in a way to build um, healing and connection.
So did you become like a chef?
I did. I worked as a line cook and a sous chef in restaurants,
Okay.
but always really paying attention to like the dynamics around food and class
Hmm.
and social
Oh.
justice um, and food security, and also the food justice movement. So having I had a real multidisciplinary approach to how I think about food.
I mean, that's fascinating to me. What got you interested in that aspect of food?
I love to cook and I love food, and I also care about communities and justice
Uh-huh.
and in doing work, I was simultaneously cooking, also working for nonprofits. So I blend the two quite easily, and seeing the disconnect between the culinary world and just everyday life for a lot of marginalized people, and
Mhm.
um, compare and contrasting what's happening around food for different communities and the inequities and the different lens that we can look at food through. So that brought me, I came to the Bay Area excited to join the food scene, but also feeling also a deep passion and commitment to really supporting the communities that don't have access to good food, and through that process and through working, I initially started in when I came to the Bay Area, just working in restaurants and doing food preparation, but always knowing that I wanted to do community work, and eventually started working um, in community programs here as well. And I was working with young people at an after school program in public housing in San Francisco, doing community nutrition education and garden based cooking with youth. Um, but was struggling with the objectives that were put forth for me, which was teach disadvantaged youth how to eat better.
Mhm.
Um, and I found that really hard to do because there were some underlying needs that I could see were not being met. That the youth had not had a lot, were not stable. They were not. They were coming in struggling and struggling visibly with um, dysregulation and toxic stress, and realizing I couldn't do that, meet that objective that my organization wanted me to meet, but that the programming that I was offering could meet some other objectives. And I was simultaneously also, I was a new mom, I had two young kids, and a lot of, when you first have your kids, you start to really become aware of what it means to raise an emotionally healthy young person. I decided to take some classes in um, child development, so I was learning about, the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, simultaneously raising my own children, and then working with youth and kids who didn't have a lot of the stability that I knew kids needed. But I made it my intention through that program to provide as much of a supportive environment, and my priority was to create a healing program, milieu for the kids, and not so much focus on here's how to eat better, but
Mhm.
here's let's connect and relate and feel safe around each other. Um, s-
So a
because
somewhat big shift, right? So initially, it sounds like you were going in there with the idea of, educating individuals on food and the culinary world and bringing to them good food. And now there's a shift to creating a safe environment, which that's a pretty awesome but huge shift.
right, right, and it very much challenges, I think, the status quo for community programs, for programs that are serving disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged youth. There, and I think that's shifting now. It's shifting now because as we think about trauma informed care and approaches, there's more awareness that if folks aren't feeling safe and reasonably regulated, then healthy practices and paying attention to disease and their own personal health can be more challenging. But th- and even in public settings, really the goal is is to change behaviors with the hope that folks won't develop diseases, especially in my work, public health nutrition. We're really looking, the goal and the funding is about preventing disease, um, but there's a couple of steps that people need to take before they can sort of change behavior to eating healthy foods, and so it's m- my lens is to really step back from nutrition advice and nutrition
Mhm.
being the goal, nutritional health being, or nutrition, diet, sorry, diet as diet change being the goal, and taking a step back and really recognizing what's the barrier to healthy diet, um, and that maybe what we've learned is that uh, a lot of times the development of illnesses like obesity and diabetes and all of these goals in public health are not due to poor dietary intake, but due to trauma and due to all kinds
Mm.
of metabolic shifts and emotional disruption that we don't recognize adequately in public health
Mhm.
nutrition and public health work.
So how long did you do that? And then when did Leah's Pantry come into play?
I did that work for about 4 years, recognizing that and gaining just more interest and passion for really looking at my work from a developmental perspective, um, an emotional health perspective, rather than nutrition outcomes. And so I discontinued the program, working at that program, and joined Leah's Pantry because there was uh, an inherent interest in innovating and working relationally with the clients that we serve in the settings that we work in, which was primarily in very low income settings. So I just felt a real strong alignment with the work at Leah's Pantry because it's so much about thinking relationally and thinking integratively and multidisciplinary thinking, which is unusual in the public health nutrition world.
So if we can, let's get specific about what it means to address nutrition through a trauma-informed lens, and what it means to work with individuals uh, with nutrition and simultaneously think about creating safety and having that trauma-informed lens. I'm curious what that would look like.
Well, so we look at it three ways. First, the communities that we serve, they're primarily not accessing mental health services. So when they're engaging with programs like ours, we are one of the few. Well, we are one of many relationships in care and healthcare that they may be having, but they may not necessarily be getting clinical services in mental health. So there's an opportunity there um, to provide some supportive care that's not mental health work, but to create a supportive environment.
Hmm.
Um, and so a lot of folks who do this work, they're nutritionists or dietitians or nutrition educators, but may not have sort of the the practice of how to relate to people, to create safety, um, to be relational, to allow people to express what they need to express, and to be really grounded in um, their emotional, the emotional relationship as well. So um, we see there's an opportunity for those of us who are working in these settings. We bring some nutrition knowledge and some good practices, but we can work with people um, in creating sort of a context that feels reassuring and
Hmm.
that feels trustworthy, and so applying those trauma informed principles that mental health providers use.
So you're doing that as a uh, nutrition professional first and foremost. You're bringing those practices and perspectives into play.
Yeah, so we're I do a lot of training with practitioners. So we bring an awareness of what do you need to do to set the stage for your work, not just bringing nutrition knowledge, but how do you work with people because you're in a relationship and you're creating a community context. You're working in a community context. You're working with people who are different from you. So, or you're working with people, and you're working with people who are living through trauma, community based trauma right now,
Hmm.
um, as well as there's historical and generational trauma,
Hmm.
and individual trauma. So, what awareness and understanding do you need to bring? You can't
So
just walk
let's, if we could,
Yeah.
let's get specific. What would that look like? You're going into a community or uh, an environment where you would have to do that. What would break it down for us? What does it look like?
Um, well, it looks like bringing letting go of your outcomes, your sense of what the outcome should be. A lot of us are working who come to work in community settings for in nutrition, is we really do want to see people stop unhealthy behaviors, like or change dietary behaviors, and so there can be an agenda that comes off right off the bat that kind of engenders a lot of mistrust. So it really starts with bringing some awareness of the ways that public health systems, you know, practitioners, previous people who came before might have um, harmed the communities that we come in contact with, where they've not had the kind of care they needed, or they've been judged. So bringing that awareness and
Hmm.
being acutely aware of how.
All right. So I kind of want to get more specific in terms of
Mhm.
what it looks like when people walk into your room, kids walk into your room. What do you do? I'm interested in you say you're creating an agenda. Be more specific. What does it look like? How do you address that?
Um, when I build a program, if I have the opportunity, there are a lot of limitations public health to build a program, but when I have the opportunity to build a program, um, I actually like to start with finding out from the community, whether my idea of what I'm going to bring is something that they want, and they need, um, or even asking, what is it that your community really wants or needs. So whenever possible, that's the first step. um, I think that we also fail to recognize that people have been using, food and food behaviors in low income communities, and traumatized communities can be seen as pathological. And so um, we often come with this notion of fixing those behaviors,
Hmm.
um, when in fact there's been an incredible wealth of resources where food is used in healing and connecting. So, my goal with a lot of programs is to identify and help the community identify and name the things that they've done through food and support those things, where they feed each other, they feed their neighbors, they've been resilient, and they've found strategies that work, to feed themselves. And so, my ideal program is one that capitalizes on those inherent assets. And my skills in culinary preparation, or in nutrition information, can help reinforce things that they want or need or don't have access to. So some of my programs involve one of my programs involves supporting cooks in a public housing community who already love to cook, are good cooks. They don't need me to really teach them a whole lot of cooking, but I can support by providing them resources that they may not have, like equipment, food, and organizational skills to help them provide food to their neighbors and to the rest of the community. So there's a lot of support of community skills already. And and a lot of great programs out there are doing that. So that's one thing that I um, do when I build a program. Another um, another thing that I do with programming, and we encourage other practitioners to do, is really reframe the messages we give folks, because we are there to educate and to inform people, to provide them some support, because a lot of the communities we're working in are suffering from illness and diet related diseases. But what are the messages that we share? Um, you know, are we sharing messages that where their bodies are a problem, that their behaviors are a problem, that the things that they normally do, that they do to feed themselves, are pathological? Or are we providing them with room to acknowledge the things that have happened in their past that have contributed to, you know poor diet right now? um
It sounds pretty. I mean, it sounds pretty intense to be bringing these two food and trauma together in a setting. Sounds really intense, and I think it's beautiful what you're doing. I'm hearing you talk about asking for permission, in the sense of, would it be okay if we brought this into the room, into the discussion? Obviously a therapeutic technique, creating safety and in terms of regulating, and obviously another trauma informed technique. Really interesting. What are some of the challenges that are inherent with such an approach?
well, this is emerging work. The challenge is that, excuse me, um, we have to bring a lot of different areas into the awareness of our fellow practitioners, and our funders, and other public health folks who want to support this work, because there's been many years of a message around obesity, right? We've kind of heard of this obesity epidemic, um, where the goal is to eradicate obesity. And so then we say, well, food is the problem, and how people eat food is the problem. Um, but what we are actually have to say, and this is what the author of the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences study, concluded, is that he said, Dr. Felitti said that obesity is protective. It's a solution to a problem. It's not the problem. Um, and so just that alone is kind of a radical in our world, because we've framed things so long as this obesity epidemic. So we're working right now on reframing this obesity epidemic as a trauma epidemic, um, and the communities that we're trying to reduce rates of obesity in are ones that face enormous community trauma, and as well as individual trauma, and a lot of this is because of inequality and racism. Um, that's a that's a big topic right there. Um,
Going back for a second, was he referring to obesity being like a coping mechanism in the same way that addictions can often be coping mechanisms for underlying trauma?
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And you're probably familiar with the research as well, and the ACEs study, but it, he was doing research. He was actually doing an obesity prevention program at the time, when he came across the ACEs, adverse child experiences, questionnaire. Developed a questionnaire, um, and and realized that even if you could get people to change their diet, um, that was not a permanent
Right.
fix, because the psychological mechanisms that got them there, were still at work. So we're trying to bring that awareness into, the public health system. So we have a tall order. We've made it a tall order. We do work in communities, and we're working directly in communities to bring a supportive environment, and to build community connection, because we see that as, um, priorities of the programs we do, not convince people to
Mm-hmm.
necessarily give up the foods that they may
Mm-hmm.
be eating. Um, but really, for us, the changes need to happen, among those of us who just our consciousness about what we think about nutrition, and that, the whole paradigm we have around nutrition right now in this country, in this culture, and individually, that food A will fix our problems. This right diet and this right food, fixes our problems. um, but I think what we've learned from the research on trauma is that, um, it's much more multi-layered, and the food item and the nutrient is really only a small part of what's going on. And so we have to address the bigger picture, and the bigger issues. And I think that what we are seeing around COVID, and how people are engaging in conversations around food right now. And there's a lot of chatter about, now I'm stress eating, and we talk a lot about stress eating. Um, but and I think what we're now that we're experiencing it kind of on a daily basis, I think it it erodes some of the assumptions we have about nutrition, and, um, that it's super easy to eat a healthy diet, and to stay healthy. You know, you just have to eat better. And
Right.
I think most of us are recognizing that that's not true, and that our stress response system, um, has so much more to do with it.
Wow.
So
I mean, fascinating work, like I said, and it definitely sounds like it's super challenging to be introducing this concept to, especially in the public health sphere. Well, let's shift gears here, Monica. In terms of educating and informing the listeners of this podcast, what go-to books could you recommend? And I often say, whether trauma related or not, but in this case, I would love for you to share some kind of on topic choices.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple. Well, right now I'm reading a book by Robert Wright called Why Buddhism is True. And he's really looking at, Buddhist spirituality and neuroscience simultaneously to kind of explain the same phenomenon. And he talks a lot about self-control. And so I really appreciate that lens, that we can understand this concept of self-control um, in both ways, and they kind of, Buddhist spirituality and neuroscience kind of say similar things, and that, he talks a lot about food and how, our concept of self-control around food is so much different than what we assume it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that one I'm finding really informing how I think about this topic. Uh, and next on my bookshelf to read, and has been highly recommended to me, is Casey Lehman's Heavy. So that's the other book I'm looking forward to read. That's his autobiography. Um, and there's a writer and dietitian whose work I'm reading constantly, and she's in England. Her name is Lucy Apremore, and she has several books as well. But I think she writes about this topic very, very eloquently, about what it really, really means to nourish yourself when you've experienced trauma, when you're stress
Mm.
eating, when your body and your sensory systems have kind of become very disrupted. And how do you recover your relationship to food, and acknowledge all that means? So
Wow.
I recommend, I definitely recommend her if you're really interested in the topic of trauma
Okay.
and nutrition.
We'll have those linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So Why Buddhism is True, number 1. Number 2 is Heavy, and then the work by Lucy Apremore. Awesome.
Yes.
All right, Monica. So what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
My Well, you can visit www.leahspantry.com, so you can reach me through there. We also moderate a community. I guess it's a website on ACEs Connection called ACEs and Nourishment,
Okay.
where we're really exploring the lens of nutrition through understanding trauma and traumatic response. So that's a great way for those to kind of ask questions and explore this topic with us.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad there are people like you out there doing this work.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Monica. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. All right. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. I really appreciate it. And if you're a new trauma therapist, if you're a student, if you're passionate about learning about trauma, if you're just starting out on your trauma-informed journey, I want to invite you to check out my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. It's specifically dedicated to therapists of all kinds who are just starting out, who want to be around other people who are doing this work, who are passionate about learning and learning from seasoned professionals. Check out Trauma Therapist 2.0. That's Trauma Therapist 2.com. Traumatherapist 2.com. All right. Have a great day.